Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited about this guest that we are having today on our Fun Chat, as we are excited about every guest. But so many of us grew up in a small community or around a small community, and yet we might have left that community, or the changes in that small community that have occurred since that time of the 1950s have been maybe to some people drastic. But today our guest is going to talk about that particular situation. Jackie, how can we go from here?
Okay. Good morning, everyone, or evening, whenever you're looking at this. At a time when World War II had just ended, Peggy Steele Olson was born in Coffeyville in southeast Kansas, 1 mile north of the Oklahoma border. Peggy earned a master's degree in education from Northwestern University. Higher education opened doors to several career paths for her. She lives in Phoenix during the winter and returns to her hometown of Coffeyville to work on a meaningful and involved project. So welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat, Peggy.
Thank you. How exciting.
Well, we're going to go back to the 50s.
We are.
How
Good.
was growing
I like
up
that.
in the 1950s in a small town impacted the decisions in your personal and professional life?
Well, growing up in a small town, but a rural small town that was very much agricultural based was something that you took for granted because that's all you knew as a kid, especially for those of us growing up in a town like Coffeyville, Kansas. So even though we were called townies, we were surrounded by the farms. And of course, the farm kids came in at least in the 9th grade to go to school with us. And so we were impacted by it. The way it impacted me growing up in the 50s in that rural community was, really several things impacted me. But the main thing that really strikes me as an adult when I reflect back on it was, even though it was a rural community, we had phenomenal schools. And I can talk about this at some time, maybe later in our discussions, but the school system in that small rural community was able to bring in talent. I had a pretty significant handicap when I entered kindergarten, and that school system brought in specialists to help me. And that was part of the school system. And I was able to walk to school, as most of us were, because we had neighborhood schools, and we had a community or a neighborhood that we grew up in. And, you knew everybody on your street. You knew their names. They knew you. You went out and played until it was dark. I mean, I know this is a familiar story that anybody growing up in that era in a small town knows. We had sidewalks, we had alleys, we burned our trash out by the alleys. So we had all the things that you don't even think about, but you take for granted when you're growing up in a small town, that I look back on now, and it's just, it was a phenomenal experience in many ways.
That is so true. And the closeness that you became with your neighbors and your school friends, you were almost like a little microcosm of friends, of people in that.
That is so, going back as an adult is very interesting, because you go back as an adult and you have all these memories of growing up there. And even though the town's changed, because as we all know, these rural communities most of them have hit the skids. Coffeyville was about 18,000 people when I grew up there, and it's a little less than 9,000 now. Coffeyville has a 29.2% poverty rate. And so we're dealing with a lot of very serious issues, as well as trying to leverage what's there that's very, very positive, and bring it back to some level that has the neighborhoods and has all of the kinds of things that we all remembered when we grew up there. That really, the small towns lost a lot of that. So we're trying, the group of us who are going back are trying to not just recreate the past, but really leverage, the new things, the technology, the things that we know that we could do in the school systems that we couldn't do, when we grew up there, to enhance that aspect of it. So growing up as a child was one experience. Going back as an adult, you really, really have your eyes opened and realize how important that upbringing was, and what we can bring back for other kids, future generations.
Peggy, if you can recall in the recesses of your mind, what one or two things stand out to you about Coffeyville, Kansas in the 50s that impacted you that is no longer there?
Well, one of the things that I was shocked about was the neighborhood. That in the older sections, in these small towns, you had the core town, and then you had what we call the rich people, who owned the lumber stores and they built the big houses around the small town. And then around those were the bungalows. And that's where the working class lived. Generally, that's kind of the way the small towns were framed. And so as I think about growing up there and going back, something that really influenced me was the neighborhood that I grew up in. I grew up on 9th Street in a neighborhood of bungalows. I lived right across the street from my grandparents' house until I was in 3rd grade. And so we knew everybody on the street. And so I was able to, at an early age, make money by going door to door and selling Christmas cards. We planted potatoes, and I had my little red wagon, and I sold potatoes door to door and had lemonade stands. And of course, at the time, I thought I was a great salesperson. Now I look back on it and I realize the neighbors are probably humoring me by, buying from me. But I had the experience of those cold calls. And so being an entrepreneur was not something that I really understood. I don't even know if that word existed back then, but certainly that has been a golden thread in my life, starting businesses and really going forward with confidence. And I look back on pulling that little red wagon along 9th Street with my greeting cards or my potatoes or the salt and pepper shakers I was selling door to door, and going up with confidence and selling those. And that was a huge piece of my existence in Coffeyville that helped me today, that confidence. My dad said, I can remember one time I went up on old lady Chris's porch, and she would never answer her door. And she came to the door and she said, you kids are always knocking on my door. And I was scared to death. And I went home, and I said, my dad said, you don't look happy. Didn't you sell anything? I said, no, Miss Chris wouldn't let me in. He said, next time you go to a door, you walk up on that front porch like you just bought that house, and you knock on that door and you smile. And he said, whether you sell them something or not, you walk off like you just sold them that house at a profit. And, for some reason, I remember that today. I'm 70. How old am I? 78 years old. And I remember that 70 years later. And I think about that many times when I don't have confidence or I'm frightened. You walk up there like you just bought that house, and you smile and you give them your best. And that kind of advice, and then extending that to the neighborhoods and the people and using that in your relationships was invaluable, and still is invaluable in my life.
So you're talking about this meeting. I'm sorry, finish up.
Well, I was just going to say, and so the neighborhood is a big deal that we're working on, because we've lost that. When I went back to restore my grandmother's house and save it, which was she raised a family of 6 in an 800 square foot bungalow and did a great job with it. We went back to save that bungalow. It was going to be bulldozed. And we restored it and turned it into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,600 square foot house that we live in the summertime there. And it's really a show place for people to see what can be done rather than bulldozing them. But that was part of a neighborhood that was owned by slumlords and rented out to people. And the houses were in horrible condition. We've turned a lot of those around. And many of the people who lived there had said they were afraid to go out in the streets. They didn't want their kids playing outside or whatever. That's not a neighborhood. That's not what we grew up in. But now when you go there 8 years later, kids are playing in the neighborhood. They're playing on the sidewalk. People know each other. They're sitting on front porches. We revived the front porch. So neighborhoods are really important.
Tell us who the we are in revitalizing Coffeyville.
And when you do that, though, please tell us why 8 years ago did this all come about?
Okay.
You,
Well,
we,
it came about. I went back to a reunion, and I was on my second marriage. I was a widow when I met my current husband, and I had not taken him back to my hometown, but he had heard me talk about it, and I wanted to go by and show him all the places that I had lived. And so Ninth Street was a street I grew up on, where I lived, my grandma lived, it was just, that was our neighborhood. So when we went by my grandma's house, which I had not been by for many years, it was abandoned, and part of the roof was off. I just had it was unbelievable. It was awful to see it. And so I tracked down the owner and proceeded to try to find out if I could buy. Then I had an aneurysm, and everything stopped because I didn't handle that. Yeah, I was back in Colorado. But after that got fixed, then I went back to another reunion and found out Grandma's house was going to be at the sheriff's sale. And if somebody didn't buy it at the sheriff's sale, it was going to be bulldozed. So went to the sale, bought the house, paid $350 for it. And I overpaid, I might say. Put a lot into it. And now it's loved it. So that's how it started. Also bought 7 other homes that were abandoned or blighted and on Ninth Street, and proceeded to fix those up and then start to create a critical mass. My husband is part of the we. He was very supportive and very encouraging and had a lot of ideas. Fix those up so we could create what he called a critical mass, so people could actually go down the street and experience what a section of a neighborhood would look like if the houses looked good, if there was landscaping, things were taken care of. And let's see, the last time I gave my report to the city commission, I think there are like 168 houses on that street for the 12-block area. And of the 168, almost all of them, I would say probably there are only 10 or 12 that really weren't, were nice. Now, over half of them we would live in, and another half of those are ones under construction or renovation. And go ahead.
How has all that renovation attracted people to the town of Coffeyville?
Well, people are coming back, like me. They're people who grew up there and for some reason just there's a soft spot in their heart, and they're coming back. We have a doctor and his family from Texas. He was an emergency room physician who's coming back, who came back, and he's bought property downtown and in the neighborhoods, and he's fixing it up. We have a retired banker from California. She's come back, and she bought her family's old dairy farm and fixed it up and lives there. Of course, the dairy farm was out in the, out in the farm area when we grew up, and now it's right next to the golf course. So it's really almost in the town. And so when you ask about who's the we, there are probably 100 people actively involved in this revitalization. And half of those are people who either return to live there full time or are returning part-time like I am. So it's a hybrid effort.
How did you get the word out to the former residents of Coffeyville to come back and take a look and see what we can do to help our town?
The main thing, that's a great question. We got a lot of publicity when we started because the transformation of the before and after for the homes was really phenomenal. And so anybody who took the local paper or the county paper would see those articles. Then the reunions, every 5 years in a small town, usually people go back for the reunions. And in a town like Coffeyville that had some issues over the years, people would come back and be really disappointed or upset because of what the downtown looked like, or, what their family home that they'd grown up in looked like. And so as word got around at the reunions and in the articles, more people started looking at Coffeyville as a place to retire. Plus, it was really affordable. I mean, it was very affordable compared to any place else I've lived, especially if you were handy and you could fix some homes up. So people who were going to retire and were going to be on more of a fixed income chose to come back and pitch in and be part of it.
So have new businesses sprung up now?
Well, that is really a good question, because that's been a challenge for us, because the downtown urban renewal of the 70s was not our friend. And we tore a lot of historic buildings down, but a lot still do remain. But urban renewal had added a lot of fancy concrete awnings and things that were in disrepair, that now are in disrepair, that we've just recently taken down. And we're getting grants to restore the facades for these buildings. And slowly but surely, the buildings are coming back. The theater that was built in 1928, the Midland Theater, that was the iconic center of the downtown and the heart of our lives growing up, had been shuttered for 2 or 3 decades. And so I'm on a board for that foundation. And we have just completed the second phase of a 4-phase project to totally revitalize and open up that theater for not only the movies and live entertainment like we had when we grew up, but to have it be more broad and have educational workshops, TED Talks, and rental space. So that's a big part of what we're doing downtown. That will be a new business in a sense.
Peggy,
I was just say I'm glad you mentioned grants, because there are many out there for revitalization of towns, of buildings, of businesses. Okay, sorry,
well, that's
Jean.
right. And the government has several programs that are fairly new, and there are I was not a grant writer. I took a course in at Northwestern and said, it's one of those things, be careful what you say you'll never do. I thought, oh, and I'm never going to do this. That was back in the 70s. And here I am writing grants, but it's very rewarding. And so we are getting grants as well as donations. And so anybody who's interested can go to, can Google it online and find out 2 or 3 grant services that really locate grants for them and help them do it. And there's a lot for rural communities right now.
Good.
In the time of the 50s, where the school system in Coffeyville was very vibrant, and then during the years as the population changed, how did that affect the education that was available in Coffeyville?
Well, Coffeyville has always had a good educational system. There have been issues with the metrics for graduation from high school in the last couple of decades, in terms of looking at students who entered the 9th grade and students who graduated, because of the issue we've had with large numbers of migrants who pull their kids out at 16 to work. And so Coffeyville has identified that as a need, and they're working with the families to try to figure out a way that they can economically steer these families in a direction that they can have what they need to have for food and things like that, but still have get their children educated. And so those numbers have skewed it if you go online and look at the numbers. But if you go into the schools and you look at what the academic performance of the graduates, it's quite good. And there's a real dedication to the school systems, and people are still involved in the extracurricular, supporting the swim team. We were always known for that, and football and the theater, the arts. And of course, we're working in tandem. We're not competing with the school system or the college. We have a very active, very vibrant and successful junior community college there that we work with. Yeah.
Okay.
So good.
So go ahead, finish. Sorry. What kind of work do migrants have there?
Well, interestingly enough, Coffeyville is a blue collar town. And so we do have a couple foundries, and we do have a lot of skilled labor jobs. And so, there are many people who come in from south of the border who work at our foundries, and that's a pretty good job. It's a hard job, but then a lot of jobs in blue collar jobs are difficult, and farming's difficult, as we all know. So the immigrants generally would do blue collar or farming labor.
Okay. And what kind of foundries?
Well, they make castings for parts for large machinery and equipment. Okay. Excuse me. And so, that work of pouring molten metal and doing castings and is hot, dirty work. But it's, guaranteed work. I mean, you always need something like that in our industrial society. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Have you found that the people coming back, that the ratio of families, young families to retired people is 50-50, or what's the effect
Well, we're
of that?
trying to attract people who can work out of their home now with COVID, and the whole understanding that you don't have to get up and go to work with a lot of jobs, with employers understanding that, and employees being able to have the discipline and the technology to do work from home, if not 100% of the time, a big portion of it. We can start attracting younger people. A lot of the people who are coming back who are part of our revitalization project are retired people who came back to retire there, and then have the time and the will. So we're trying to get younger people into the town.
Do you find that when you go back in the summertime, that's what I understand that you do, that you want to stay for 12 months of the year?
Well, as my husband would say, it's an acquired taste. It's my hometown. It's not his hometown.
Yeah.
And we have a great life in Phoenix, and I have asthma. So the winters are much better for me in Phoenix than they are in the cold, wet climate of Coffeyville. But I have good friendships there and could easily live there full time, year round. Yeah.
Mhm.
How
Do
many
you
churches are there, or what variety of churches are
Oh
there?
my gosh. That's kind of a joke. We laugh about that because we say there's a church for every family. It's a
Oh,
part of the Bible Belt, and we have lots and lots of churches. I was raised a Southern Baptist, and
Mhm.
that church is mission driven. And so I went back, and I think they started 7 or 8 churches just in the general county geographic area.
Wow.
And I don't know the exact number, but I will tell you it's very, very it's a very high number, the ratio between
Okay.
families and church.
Other churches besides Baptist, if there's a
Oh yeah,
variety.
everything. The Catholic Church is very, very, very active. Interestingly enough, the last business I started, I was on an advisory board for Regis University in Denver, which is one of the Jesuit universities, and so they wanted to go to market with a for-profit organization. So I'd sold my first business and was on a non-compete. So I did pro bono work for them and helped them develop their business plan and then start a business. It's still in business called the Regis Company. And we do software development for large corporations. And so until we bought the Regis out, the Jesuits were on my board, and I gained such an appreciation and love and understanding for the Catholic Church and the Jesuits because of so many things that they believed in, but their love of education. And I, as a Southern Baptist growing up back in the 50s, there was a real division between different religions and Protestants and Catholics. Well, we don't have that now. And but I will say, my mother being old-fashioned, it took me 3 years to tell her I was working for a Catholic university because she grew up Southern Baptist. And then she was fine. She was just fine with it. But that has been a real bonus in my life to expand and the different religions, and especially an appreciation for the Jesuits. But the Catholic Church is very, very active, very good schools there, and very big contributor to our community.
Okay, thanks.
Your entrepreneurship as an 8-year-old child is stunning. And were there other children back in that era who did the same thing?
Well, there were, I will have to say, with my friends, most of them were customers. They didn't have I don't know anybody else that dug potatoes and pulled a wagon along, and sacked them and sold them. But I had to. I mean, I learned early on that money is power. And if you have your own money, you have more independence. And so most of the kids my age, I was a little younger than most of them were when they started. But, one of the things that I see that's a consistent as we got older was the work ethic that we all tended to have. All of our parents, whether they were white collar or blue collar, were workers. And most of us grew up with a very strong work ethic. And that, holds true throughout your life. And that's a gift. It's a wonderful thing.
Do you see any of those young entrepreneurs just offhandedly now in Coffeyville?
You mean the ones that were entrepreneurs when I was there, or entrepreneurs now?
No. Are there eager 8-year-olds who want to get out there and sell?
Yes. Well, there's a program called STEM,
right.
Throughout all the schools, and that's really encouraging people. Now we're trying to put the A in STEM and STEAM, which a lot of universities are embracing, so that the arts are part of that, because they are. Right. They just, and so that really encourages innovation and entrepreneurship. And I see a lot of creativity and kids trying to figure out ways to make money. There's a funny little balance, because I see it with my step grandchildren right now, where they are graduates from high school and they want to be an entrepreneur and, make money and be rich in 5 years and all of that. And that's great. Who doesn't want to do that? But there's, a whole work ethic that you have to have that goes into it. So you have to balance that realism and your willingness to work and dig in and do what needs to be done with the vision of, if I were, I could make all of this money, because most businesses fail within the first 2 years, most small businesses. So being an entrepreneur is not that easy. So we see a lot of young ones, but we try to help them with a dose of reality of what's really involved.
Does Small Business Administration have an effect on these young people when they want to start a business?
I think the guaranteed SBA loans can. I think most people who, again, I don't have data on this, but my experience is that most people who have the business plans and can get a loan guaranteed through SBA are older. I do know of one couple that started a coffee shop in Coffeyville, and I think they borrowed some money. I don't know if it was guaranteed by SBA, and that's been very, very successful. But again, there are some grants available for women who want to go into business, for minorities, and so while grants aren't always available for a for-profit organization, they often are available for initiatives that encourage entrepreneurship or creativity or innovation. So, there's money available. It's not always SBA money, but there is some money available.
Do you know of any other town in which the revitalization from former residents is occurring?
Well, we have done some research, and there are towns throughout the U.S. that are being revitalized, with a variety of, underpinning sources of labor and money and things like that. We know of 2 or 3 where there are very, very wealthy people returning and literally, buying the buildings and, underwriting 10 years of, renovation and things like that. We don't have that in Coffeyville. We don't have that kind of resource to help us. So we're all volunteer, and so we have to look to, ourselves. There are some other towns that I know. There was a study done at Chapel Hill in North Carolina of towns under 15,000, mainly rural communities, that had turned it around. And that study found that, generally, the towns, the smaller towns who were able to really revitalize and turn their towns around, had some things in common. And a big one was, they quit fighting with their rival towns, and they quit fighting within the county and work together. And so we have some of that going on too. We're trying to work together with other small towns and a spirit of cooperation instead of competition.
I'm thinking of Joanna and Chip Gaines and how they revitalized Waco, is it?
Yep.
Or in the process of revitalizing it. Do you see Coffeyville as becoming a tourist attraction?
Well, we do. And it's interesting because we have a little town called Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And I don't know if you know the Pioneer woman, the Pioneer.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's in Pawhuska, and they're ranchers. And So they have totally revitalized Pawhuska. And literally, when you go into Pawhuska, you have to wait in line to get into the Mercantile to have lunch there. And the way they merchandise, the Mercantile is one of the big old, 150-year-old historic buildings that was in the center of Pawhuska. Pawhuska is only about, a couple thousand people. So it's a really small town. And so they've revitalized it. Every town has a little different profile about where the money and the labor and the effort's coming from. Coffeyville is, we're a hard candy town. I mean, there's not any big benefactor that's written checks for us. We're all volunteer. We're scraping together money, putting our own money in when we can, getting loans, getting grants, doing our own work. It's a very interesting, dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to focus on an area in Coffeyville to bring in folks to see the town from outside of Coffeyville, what do you think would be the draw?
Well, we are already famous. The Dalton Defenders Museum. We have the Dalton Boys. The terrorists back in the cowboy days were the Dalton gang. There were 3 or 4, and they were the ones that were terrorizing the Midwest by robbing trains and banks. And I guess they thought the people of Coffeyville weren't that sharp. They could take 2 banks at once. And when they would ride into town, they would ride in on their horses and they would rob a bank and ride out. And the people in the town would be just, mortified, and they wouldn't fight back. Well, in Coffeyville, they decided to rob 2 banks. They rode into town, and they had a plan. So I think there were 5 of them. Half of them went to one bank. The other couple went to another bank right across the little street. And the townspeople saw that they were the Dalton boys because a couple of them were from the area and had grown up there. And so instead of just laying low, they went into the local Isham's hardware store where they had a supply of guns and rifles. And they fought them. They killed the Dalton gang, in essence. Only one survived. Yeah, and they took care of them, and some of the townspeople were also, killed. So it was quite a battle. But they eliminated the terrorists that were taking, lives and money and terrorizing these towns, and they stood up to them. So there's a Dalton Museum that's very, very interesting. So people come from all over the world to see that. And then we also have the Old Brown Mansion. We had a very wealthy family that built a mansion just outside of town, and that's been restored, and that's open. And then we have an aeronautical museum because the Funk brothers developed. Actually, they got their license from Orville and Wilbur Wright, taught them to fly, and the Funk brothers built little airplanes, and Funk Aircraft was quite famous in Coffeyville for many, many years. And so we have that museum. We're leveraging those, and then we're taking the theater that we're working on, which will have all kinds of events and draws, and it'll be a destination. It already is a one-day destination for people. We believe it will be a weekend destination for people.
So do you have a motel that's springing up now? Because
we have a Holiday Inn Express. We have a 4 or 5 fairly large hotels because we're on I-69, which goes from Oklahoma City to Kansas City, and we intersect with I-66, which goes east and west along the Kansas Missouri track, and we're not too far from historic 66. So we have rooms.
Okay, good. So,
are you working with, or is the Chamber of Commerce there in Coffeyville working with other local chambers to draw people as a tourist area?
Yes, actually, our tourism bureau is part of the chamber, and they have a very specific tourism plan, and they are looking at as we evolve and as we have more types of activities to to publicize those in a broader market area. For example, now that the first part of the Midland Theater is done, that our theater happens to have a ballroom that accommodates 100 people. A lot of the theaters don't have that. And that's totally separate from the theater. That's done, that's open. We were able to build 2 handicap restrooms on the first floor, for one for men and one for women. And there was nothing like that in Coffeyville at the ground level anywhere in the town. So we can really accommodate people. And we're going to have our first display, which is a Johnny Cash expo. That's a traveling display through our Department of Tourism in our ballroom. And we're really looking forward to that. And that will take place in the fall. And so we'll have some things like that will, and that's very good, because in our area, Johnny Cash is like king, you know. Music, it's country western music. Everybody knows Johnny Cash, all ages. So that's a great way for us to introduce, you know, bringing people in and having things in addition to theater and movies. So
yes. So Peggy, what's next? What's on your list next to do for Coffeyville?
Well, I go back Memorial Day, and in the past, I've gone back anywhere from 5 to 6 months a year. This year, I'm going back for about 3 to 4 months, and I'm going back, and we have to do the whole theater. We've now done the backstage, front of the house. We're having people in, but we have the house. And this particular theater, as I said, it was built as a vaudeville theater. It has 800 seats. It's beautiful. It has not been destroyed by urban renewal or somebody coming in and slapping up wallboard and painting it strange colors and taking down the plaster. And so we are raising $2 million for renovating that. And that will be a huge draw, because we'll be able to have conferences, meetings, as well as events there. So that's a big, big effort. Then in our neighborhoods, we'd taken vacant lots and converted them. And we had one vacant lot that we took that was quite large, and we took and converted it to what we call the Fresh Start Youth Program garden. And we have community garden on it. We have a greenhouse. We bring boys and girls clubs and the neighborhood youth in, and they learn what seeds. You know, a lot of kids don't understand that things they eat grow in the ground. I mean, there's a disconnect, even in rural communities, these towns, from what they eat to how it gets there. And so we call it the Seed to Feed program. So they can see the different stages, they can help. And then they can also take these vegetables, fresh produce, to our local food pantry and understand the concept of serving others and giving to others. So the 2 things this summer for me will be really supporting our theater in that fundraising effort to try to get that open as soon as possible for the community. And the second thing is to continue to support and bring in programs for that Seed to Feed program that we have open from like April through October for the youth in the communities in our neighborhood.
Is the theater an Art Deco? Is the theater an Art Deco style?
Oh, it is. Yes. Yeah. I wish, you know, I had pictures of it here. It's beautiful. It's the Bowler brothers were instrumental, and they probably built some in Iowa, because they built theaters all over. And while they aren't attributed as architects for the Midland, if you look at what they built, somebody borrowed their ideas, or they borrowed the Midland ideas, because there are many theaters around the country or in the Midwest that they built that are the Art Deco and just amazing architecture that the Midland replicates. So it's beautiful, really beautiful.
Peggy, you need to be in your group, your husband in your group of residents, retired residents, those all involved with the revitalization of Coffeyville, Kansas, need to have many pats on your back for what you're doing for your hometown. What was your hometown in the 1950s? Peggy Steele, we thank you so much for your conversation with us today. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you.
That town is on fire for sure, thanks to the revitalators. So, folks, before you go, please take note in the upper right-hand corner of the book, While the Windmill Watched, a Slice of Rural America in the 1950s. The Fun Chat is a product of that book. so to speak. It's kind of a tangent. Also, please, there's a look at the purple banner below. Go to the website and find out all sorts of information about the book and the fun chat and the vendors where you might find the 1950s, the book. While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. So until next time, tell your friends, even your relatives, about this 1950s fun chat. Until then, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.